All right, good morning, everybody. What's going on? Big fight tonight, obviously. Shakur Stevenson versus Jamal Herring, and strong possibility. I will be going live tonight, doing the live cast for that fight. It's on late, but hopefully I can stay awake and get that done. I love doing those live casts with you guys. I love scoring the fight live and just discussing, what we see and sharing opinions on the fight as we watch it live together. It's almost like that barroom type feel or sports bar type feel. Right before we get started, I just got to say this. If you're one of those people who says, I don't care about the sport of boxing in terms of the financial side of it, I don't care about the business side of boxing. I just care about best fighting the best. If you use the term fanagers or pocket watcher when you talk about people who watch boxing, who commentate on boxing, and talk about the financial side of boxing, then this video may not be for you. And before you give it a dislike, before you leave a comment about, oh, who cares about what the money side of the boxing and who cares about the fighters, if you're one of those people, just click the X and leave. I mean, because this isn't going to be the video for you. I'm not the type of person that likes to throw things in people's face and say, I told you so. But way back, I want to say, I have a video in the description box. So it's from April of 2019. DStyle and myself, we did a video and we talked about the apps, DAZN and ESPN Plus, and we asked if they were worth it. And we also discussed if DAZN in particular was going to be able to continue doing what they were doing, keep the price the same, continue to give fights and not have any pay-per-view fights on their app. We also questioned whether or not they'd be able to pay fighters these very high purses for long. So those were the things we questioned. And we also questioned how much of an impact they would have on the United States, because it seemed as though that was their mission statement, to really get some subscribers in the US, right? Because we already know they were in a lot of different countries. And at that particular time, they weren't in the UK. So we were just being objective, breaking things down, and we were questioning these things because in our opinions, a lot of the things that they were promising did not seem realistic and did not seem sustainable long term. And given what they've done over the years since they've come into existence in the US, a lot of the things that they promised, a lot of the things that they said they were going to do, they're starting to backtrack on and not deliver in those specific areas, right? So, like I said, I don't normally like to say I told you so, but I remember when we were doing that video and we were just being objective. We were saying good things and bad things. And of course, there's good things and bad things to anything, right? But everyone was calling us haters. And even at that time, DAZN wasn't even in the UK. And just because Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua were affiliated with them, a lot of the UK fans were giving us a lot of stick, saying we were haters, we just don't like Joshua, we don't like Eddie Hearn, you idiots would rather pay for pay-per-view fights, blah, 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 blah. So this is the reason why I'm going to make this video, because I thought we were being very objective. I thought we made very valid points, and recent history has shown us to be true. So first of all, everyone was talking about these, the long-term deal that Canelo got, the deal that Golovkin got as well. And I said, and D-Style said, I wonder if they're going to be able to fulfill that contract, because these were long contracts. I think Golovkin had 6 fights, that's a 3-year deal. And Alvarez had 11 fights. So the argument was, if these guys weren't going to fight each other, and the other middleweights weren't going to fight each other, because DAZN had Demetrius Andrade, as one of the middleweights, and they had, I think, at the time, I think there was a lot of other middleweights, European middleweights, fighting on DAZN too as well. They had a lot of super middleweights. They had Callum Smith. They had George Groves, I think was there at the time. Chris Eubank Jr., I think at times was fighting on DAZN, and he's currently fighting on DAZN right now. So there was some decent fights in between 160 and 168, and a lot of those matchups we thought were going to happen, and they just didn't. Right? Obviously, the George Groves, Chris Eubank Jr. fight, that was a good fight, right? But these pay-per-view quality fights that we were promised, the Golovkin Canelo third fight that we were promised, it never materialized. And regardless of whose fault it was, this didn't happen. And ultimately, that deal with Canelo Alvarez, they tried to restructure it. So obviously, people want to talk about Trilla and how they're not paying fighters. I'm not saying that DAZN's not paying fighters, but these gigantic money contracts that they originally put forth to Canelo and to Golovkin, they restructured them. And it's been reported that Golovkin's contract has been restructured, so they can't pay them. They can't pay Golovkin, and they couldn't pay, or they wouldn't pay Canelo what they originally offered. So they restructured the deal. So that tells us that, was the money really sustainable? And my argument was, and I think DStyle's argument was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but to pay that guaranteed money for that many fights, for that long of a period of time, when there wasn't very many marquee matchups out there at the time, what were the marquee matchups for Canelo and Golovkin? Each other, right? That was the big money fight at the time. They had to fight each other. And after that, what other big money matchup was there out there for them? Right? I would have loved to see Canelo or Golovkin fight Demetrius Andrade, right? I would have loved to have seen that fight. I wouldn't have mind seeing them fight Chris Eubank Jr. I wouldn't have mind seeing them, them fight a lot of fighters, a lot of the super middleweights, like obviously, we had PBC, a lot of those super middleweights were over at PBC, and some of the middleweights were over at PBC. But, I would have loved to have seen some of those matchups take place. What's up, Lady Chan? What's up, everybody in the chat? What's up, G Funky? How's it going? So the only argument we had, or the only criticism we had back then was, where they'd be able to generate these marquee matchups to be able to justify paying these fighters, or not even justify, but be able to pay these fighters what they were worth. Because when you sign someone to such a long-term deal, you don't know what's going to happen 2-3 years down the road. A fighter can lose. Golovkin, I thought, lost to Derevyanchenko, right? But, he got the decision. So you don't know, what you're going to get 3-4 years down the road. So to lock someone in at such a high price for a long period of time, for a great amount of fights, we just said that wasn't a good move. And obviously it wasn't a good move, because they had to restructure both deals, and Canelo ultimately got out of his deal, and he's back to a fight to fight, which is fine, because now he can go. The proof's going to be in the pudding. Let's see how many pay-per-view buys Canelo Plant actually does, right? Let's see, because Showtime does a pretty good job promoting the pay-per-views, not as well as Fox does, but let's see what happens, right? Let's see if Canelo, and here's another thing, like DAZN really never let us know, how many people, how many people were watching these fights. They never gave us the viewership for these events. So we didn't know how many people were watching, right? So that's one thing that they couldn't fulfill, right? And even Eddie Hearn is saying that they're going to have to start changing how much money they're paying the fighters over at DAZN. They're not going to be able to keep paying everyone these gigantic purses. So that's one thing that we were right about, right? Here's another thing we question. How long are they going to be able to charge us $9.99 without raising the price, right? And they did raise the price, and they doubled the price, right? And they didn't just raise it, they doubled it. So that was another thing we were right about, but everyone was like, oh, you're hating, you're hating, you're hating. So that was one thing that we were right about, and that was one thing that we felt wasn't sustainable, right? And here's the third claim, right? Well, we're going to try to really sign a lot of these American boxers, and we're going to try to attract a lot of American subscribers. They did sign some American boxers, Devin Haney was a good pickup. Having Golden Boy fighters fight there, Virgil Ortiz, Maurice Hooker, it was a good fight, right? Ryan Garcia, Luke Campbell, on DAZN, that was a good fight, right? But again, they still have fallen short with their goal, because I don't believe in, correct me if I'm wrong, and they've kind of confirmed this themselves, that they have not got and received as many US subscribers as they anticipated and as they wanted, right? So they were wrong about that, right? They failed in that area. But again, there's nothing wrong with them trying. I'm not saying that they were wrong in trying, but the big thing was the purses. D-Style and I said there was no way they're going to be able to continue to pay these guys when the matchups just weren't there. At least when Showtime signed Mayweather, right? They knew they had a potential Canelo fight and a potential Pacquiao fight. They knew that those two fights were going to pay off, and whatever losses they had in the other fights, they knew those two fights were gonna make up for that, right? But with Canelo and Golovkin, outside of fighting each other, what other marquee matchup? Now Golovkin can fight Murata in Japan, but once again, are U.S. fight fans going to be excited about that? And I'm not saying boxing revolves around America. Don't get me wrong, but that was their mission statement. That was their goal. That we're going to make a splash here in the United States, right? From what I wrote above, also regarding to the price, I have DAZN for 12 Swiss a month, and I get to watch most of the U.S. pay-per-views on DAZN. Okay. And we watch a lot of the UK pay-per-views as well. But once again, and maybe I'm sounding narrow-minded here, but I'm not trying to. What is regarded as a pay-per-view in the UK or in another country may not be regarded as a pay-per-view in the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved the Joshua Usyk fight, but I don't think that could have been a pay-per-view. Well, given what we're seeing now, they're putting Rolly and Tank on pay-per-view, but I would not think that would be a fight that would get as much attention as Wilder Fury 3 did, right? Which they did 650,000 pay-per-view buys. If you put Joshua and Usyk on pay-per-view, maybe they would get 300,000 pay-per-view buys or 250, whatever. So again, what's a pay-per-view fight in another country may not be a pay-per-view fight in the United States. So that was one area where I think that they kind of fell short in too, right? And now I'm hearing that they're going to stop focusing as much on the U.S. market and start focusing on other countries, particularly in Europe. I have no problem with that. But once again, that's another promise or claim that they're backtracking on, which is fine. I mean, you when you open a business, you have mission statement, you have goals, and given the circumstances of what happens in the market or whatever, things change. I get that. But they've made a lot of claims when they first started that they are not able to follow through on. It's just a fact. And the data that I've provided, you can find all of this data on the internet. You could find all this internet all this data on the internet, right? So that's another thing they went back on. And now Eddie Hearn has confirmed, right? Has confirmed that they're considering doing pay-per-view events, which is something that they said that they weren't going to do. We're going to give you pay-per-view quality fights at our monthly subscription price, right? So if they do go through with this pay-per-view claim that they said they're going to do, then that's another thing they went back on their word on. Thank you so much, Alexander Wilson. He says, Lou DiBella said that DAZN has switched their strategy to focus on Europe, which is why they are attempting to buy BT Sports. Okay, great. So that's another thing they went back on their word on. And they told us that they were going to promise us pay-per-view quality fights for a monthly subscription. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go down this list of the fights that have been on DAZN this year. And again, there's a lot of U.S. pay-per-views that we've gotten this year, particularly from the PBC, that I don't believe were pay-per-view quality fights. I don't think those fights that Tank fought this year were pay-per-view quality, right? So you can sit there and say, well, the United States is, the U.S. is doing the same thing. But here's the difference. Showtime and PBC never promised you that we're going to give you pay-per-view quality fights for free, or not for free, for that monthly subscription at a much lower price. So at least PBC and Showtime and Fox, they didn't make a promise that they couldn't follow through on, right? So let's go down the list of these fights that they've put on this year, and you tell me if you believe that these were pay-per-view quality fights. Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell. That's not a pay-per-view quality fight, in my opinion. Josh Warrington versus Mauricio Lara. That's not a pay-per-view quality fight, in my opinion. Now, by me saying I don't believe they're pay-per-view quality fights, doesn't mean that I didn't like the fight, that I didn't think the fight was a good matchup, and that I didn't enjoy the matchup. But these aren't fights that I believe mainstream fans in the United States would want to pay for, pay-per-view wise. And in a lot of these fights that PBC has put on pay-per-view, a lot of fans haven't been paying for it because let's look at the numbers. As much as, I like Tank, but Tank doing 200,000 pay-per-view buys is not really impressive when you're living in a country that has, 354 million people, 258 million people are the adult population. If you're doing 200,000, when you see Teofimo Lopez, and Vasily Lomachenko just being on regular ESPN, getting, I think, 3 million people watching them. That's a far cry more than the 200,000 that was watching Tank fight Barrios, right? So that's just my opinion. I don't know how much money these guys make. I know what they say they make, but we're not going to get too much into that because I can't prove any of that. Okay, so Josh Warrington, Maurice, Lara, that's not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. Jojo Diaz versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, that's not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. David Avanesian versus Josh Kelly, not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. Joseph Parker versus Junior Fai, not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. Canelo Alvarez versus Avni Yildirim, not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. Saritsit Rungvisai versus Kawantai Sithmorangsung, that is not a pay-per-view fight in my opinion. And Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Juan Francisco Estrada was a phenomenal matchup. But once again, I don't think that would do well as a pay-per-view fight. So again, some of these matchups are very good, but they're not pay-per-view fights. Lawrence Okoli versus Krzysztof Glowacki, not a good fight, but not a pay-per-view fight. Virgil Ortiz versus Maurice Hooker, another excellent fight, but not pay-per-view. Dillian White, Alexander Povetkin, maybe a pay-per-view in the UK. Dillian White does do good numbers over in the UK, but if you would have put that fight in the United States as a pay-per-view fight, wouldn't do well. Marundajan Akhmeldiev. Excuse me if I can't pronounce that that good. I apologize to Akhmeldiev if I pronounce his name wrong. Rizaluf versus Awasa, not a pay-per-view fight. Conor Ben, Samuel Vargas, not a pay-per-view fight. Fabio Tucci versus Dillian Bregion, not a pay-per-view fight. Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams, not a pay-per-view fight. Sandor Martin versus Kay Prosper, not a pay-per-view fight. Derek Chisora versus Joseph Parker, maybe a pay-per-view fight. In the UK, not in the United States. Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders is a good matchup, decent fight. But if you noticed, Canelo, even when he was fighting on pay-per-view, he was a free agent. There were still fights he was fighting on regular Showtime and regular HBO. So I wouldn't be surprised if that fight wasn't on the DAZN, that possibly that fight could have been on Showtime or even Fox. I wouldn't be surprised if they would have put that on there. But that they may have put that on pay-per-view. Canelo, let's say that could possibly be, but I don't think it would be because Billy Joe Saunders really isn't known in the United States. So that I would say would not be a pay-per-view fight either. Which good matchup though. Joshua Buatsi versus Daniel Santos, not a pay-per-view fight. Devin Haney, Jorge Linares, not a pay-per-view fight. Louis Ritson versus Jamias Ponce, not a pay-per-view fight. Ami Munguia versus Camille Saramega, not a pay-per-view fight. Julio Cesar Martinez versus Joel Cordova, not a pay-per-view fight. Gilberto Ramirez versus Sullivan Barrera, not a pay-per-view fight. Zukan versus Lee Wood, definitely not a pay-per-view fight. Jazza Dickens versus Kid Gallihan, great fight, not a pay-per-view fight though. Joshua Buatsi versus Ricards Bolotniks, not a pay-per-view fight. Virgil Ortiz versus Janis Kavaluskas, great fight, but not pay-per-view in my opinion. Mauricio Lara versus Josh Warrington, not a pay-per-view fight. Flip Hergovich versus Marco Radanovic, not a pay-per-view fight. Carmen Lajarga versus Dillian Charat, not a pay-per-view fight. Now here's a tricky one. Anthony Joshua versus Orlando Usyk. Great matchup. Great fight. Very enjoyable fight. Definitely a pay-per-view fight in the UK. Not so sure that would be a pay-per-view fight in the United States because Anthony Joshua has really not made a name for himself over here. And not a lot of people know who Alexander Usyk is in the United States. And that's a shame. Now, if that was a pay-per-view fight, I would buy it, without question. But not so sure that we classify that as a pay-per-view fight in the United States. Definitely in the UK. Daniel Scardina versus Jürgen Doberstein, not a pay-per-view fight. Liam Smith versus Anthony Fowler, very, very good fight. Very entertaining fight. Maybe pay-per-view fight in the UK, not in the United States. Mikey Garcia versus Sandor Martin. Definitely not a pay-per-view fight. So let's see what we got coming up here for the rest of the year. We got Chantel Cameron versus Mary Mcgee. Decent fight, not pay-per-view quality. Mateo Signan, and that fight's going to be on October 30th. November 5th, we got Mateo Signan, Ruben Diaz. Not a pay-per-view quality fight. November 13th, Kid Gallihan versus Kiko Martinez. Decent fight. Should be a walkover with all due respect to Kiko Martinez. Definitely not a pay-per-view quality fight. November 13th, Jaime Munguia versus Gabe Rosado. That's a very fun matchup that I would love to see. Don't think that's pay-per-view quality. Demetrius Andrade versus Jason Quigley. Not even excited about that fight. Should be a win for Andrade with all due respect to Quigley. Teofimo Lopez, November 27th versus George Kambosos. Do not think that's going to be a competitive fight. That's definitely not a pay-per-view fight. And, it was originally slated to be a pay-per-view fight, but it's not going to be on pay-per-view fight. It'll be a pay-per-view fight now. Joseph Parker versus Derek Chisora 2. The first fight was excellent. So I think the second fight should be good as well. But again, definitely a pay-per-view fight in the United Kingdom, in the UK, but not in the United States. So the beautiful thing about the zone is if I didn't have the zone, some of those fights would end up on other networks, maybe Showtime, maybe Fox, maybe ESPN. Some of those fighters would probably have deals with PBC or Top Rank or another American promoter, whatever. So some of those fights I would probably be able to see, but a lot of those fights I would not be able to see. I'd have to stream them, or I'd have to, dig for them. Which I don't like streaming fights because I'm not crazy about the quality. I don't like the buffering, the stopping and starting. So the beautiful thing I have to shout out the zone and particularly Matchroom for is they're giving me a lot of matchups that I would not be able to see if I didn't have the zone. Now I wouldn't be able to see Lawrence Okoli versus Goaki. I wouldn't be able to see Zukan versus Lee Wood, right? I wouldn't be able to see Mauricio Lara versus Josh Warrington, and I wouldn't be able to see Joshua versus Usyk because Joshua got rid of his Showtime deal. That was the only way we were. And Liam Smith versus Anthony Fowler would not be able to see that one either. So I'm grateful for the fact that I'm seeing more boxing than I've ever been able to see before. And the beautiful thing is I've always been a fan of UK boxing, and the only way I was able to see these UK fights is people would send me. I had a lot of friends in the UK that would send me these fights and send me links to be able to see these fights. Now it's at my fingertips. I could be at the gym sometimes. I'll be at the gym, I'll be finishing up my workout on the treadmill, and I'm able to watch the main. I'm able to watch these fights on my phone. While I'm working out or I'm going for a walk, or whatever. Right? I love it. I love it. Don't get me wrong. So there's a lot of upside to having the zone. All I'm saying is we were just critical of what they were going to be able to do. Like a lot of the things they were saying they were going to be able to do, we just didn't think that long term they were sustainable, and we were right. The evidence and the data and just the empirical data, all of it, what they've done shows us that D-Style and myself were right. And we were just being objective, but we were being insulted, called haters, blah, blah, blah. So I'm still paying $9.99 a month for DAZN. I was grandfathered into that. I probably could pay the 100 or whatever and save a little bit more, but I just did. I just left it the way it was. 100 a year is a no-brainer. But once again, I wouldn't be surprised if the price goes up. And if you're not into UK boxing, right, then you may not like the zone because again, the objective was to bring, fights that sign all these American fighters and bring marquee matchups at a lower pay-per-view price than what the cable companies were doing, right? That was the goal. We're going to give you pay-per-view quality fights for a subscription price of $9.99 a month. Now, a lot of people were dipping in and dipping out. They were only paying for Canelo fights. They were only paying for Joshua fights, right? They weren't interested in these other matchups like fans like myself were. So what they did was they raised the price for people. And I understand that why they did that. But once again, it was something that they said that they weren't going to do. We're gonna, they raised the price like I think 6 months after the app came out. They didn't indicate they were going to do that. We were under the impression that for the very least that the price would stay the same for a while, right? So again, I don't think they've given us pay-per-view quality fights. So to try to compare their fights, but once again, what are pay-per-view quality fights really? I think Wilder Fury 3 was pay-per-view quality. Canelo Plant, I think, is pay-per-view quality, right? What other pay-per-view fights did we get this year that we could consider that were pay-per-view worthy? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had with Tank's been on paper. They're trying to have all the Tanks fights on pay per view. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I like, let me ask you this: I'm going to be getting Shakur Stevenson versus Jamal Herring, which is a great fight, free, right? I got Mike Burchelt versus Oscar Valdez, free, right? I got Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez, free, right? Um, I got Jamel Charlo versus what's his name? Oh my god, I can't fucking drawing a blank here. Drawing a blank here. The unification fight. Got that free. Can't believe I'm drawing a blank here. That's fucking aggravating me that I'm drawing a blank. Oh, Brian Castano. That's right. That was a great fight that we got for free, right? So we got we got some decent free fights that I think you could argue were better than some of those DAZN matchups. So I guess my argument is the beautiful thing about it is we were being able to watch more fights more frequently. You can watch boxing almost every week now because of apps like DAZN and ESPN Plus, and we're seeing fighters that we were never able to see before, right? We're seeing a lot of UK fighters that we were never able to see before, right? That other fans would not be able to see before, right? So we were for me, I'm happy, but I'm also just critical of, did they really accomplish what they set out to do? And for me, it's worth it, but for a mainstream for like a mainstream fight fan, right? I'm not so sure that they're gonna buy DAZN, right? I know a lot of my friends that heard about Anthony Joshua and Usyk, but they didn't have the app, right? They didn't have the app, right? So now, another thing they said they weren't going to do is they weren't going to have ads. Then they added ads in, right? So don't be surprised if fights like Joshua Usyk in the future are going to be on pay-per-view. Don't be surprised if some of Dillian White's fights aren't going to be on pay-per-view. Don't be surprised. All right? So that's the thing. So that's the thing, right? ESPN and ESPN Plus are not free. You have to pay for them through a cable or digital subscriber. They are not true. I agree with that. But ESPN is very. It's not everyone has ESPN. If you have a basic cable package of like $30 to $40 in the United States will get you ESPN. It'll get you ESPN. So it's pennies. ESPN's like literally pennies on the dollar, if you were to think about it. Right? Because most people have basic cable here anyways. So I understand what you're saying, though. Thank you so much for the super chat, Alexander Wilson. That is correct. That is correct. So is DAZN worth it? For me, yeah. But did they accomplish what they said they were going to do? And is it worth it for a lot of people in the United States? Because there's a lot of fight fans that just they won't buy it because they don't. There's a lot of people that have YouTube channels on here and they call themselves analysts, but they're not talking about. They're not doing a podcast every week like myself, Mike Montero, like HCP. Shout out to Maestro, D Style, G Funky. They're not. Ring IQ is another guy. Like we covered all the fights from around the globe. These other content creators, you know who they are. They're just covering the American fights and the mainstream fights. They're not doing what we do, right? There's a lot of channels that don't do what we do. Coach Malachi, shout out to him. He covers, all the boxing as a whole internationally. But a lot of these guys are not buying the zone because they're not interested in fights like Liam Smith versus Anthony Fowler. They're not going to talk about that fight, right? But I loved the fight. The fight was phenomenal, right? They're not going to talk about all those fights, right? So I think it's worth it, but it's not worth it to a lot of these other fans in America because, once again, they're not going to pay a monthly subscription for an app that doesn't have that they're not going to use every month because some people are only going to be interested. Like, to be honest with you, I could like. The majority of people who watch boxing, even these YouTube channels, they're interested in Anthony Joshua. They're interested in Canelo Alvarez. They may be interested in Ryan Garcia. They may be interested in Golovkin, right? They're gonna be interested in Virgil Ortiz, right? They'll be interested in that, but are they really going to be caring about Liam Smith? They're going to really be caring about Zukon? Are they really going to be caring about Lewis Ritson? Devin Haney's another guy that they'll probably watch. But again, even the Devin Haney fans, these guys who love Devin Haney, a lot of these channels, they don't have the zone, or they say they don't have the zone at least, right? So we'll see. So when we were saying all these things, we were right. We were saying that they wouldn't be able to continue to charge $9.99. We anticipated that they would up the price, right? But we didn't know. We were skeptical of the money they were paying fighters and how long it would last, and even if these deals would be able to be carried out to the end, right? And they weren't, because they both big money deals were restructured. So we were right about that. We were also right about the pay-per-view quality fights, because since I've had DAZN, I really haven't seen a pay-per-view quality. I've never seen a pay-per-view quality fight, in my opinion. I've seen very good fights. I've seen fights I enjoyed, fights that I'm grateful that I've been able to watch and appreciative of. But the whole thing of we're going to give you pay-per-view quality fights at a fraction of the cost, they didn't deliver on that. And it's not, and fair play to them. It may not even be their fault, because a lot of these fighters didn't want to fight each other, so that's the thing. Would Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia be a pay-per-view fight? Absolutely. Right? Would Joshua versus Wilder have been a pay-per-view fight? Absolutely. Right? But again, that's one thing they didn't deliver on. They said, they didn't have ads. Now they have ads, right? They have commercials now. That was another thing that they said that we don't have, like that regular TV has. Oh, no commercials. No interruptions. So now you have commercials now, right? Now they're even saying that they're going to be doing pay-per-views. So we're doing a recap here of the thing, like just people who joined in late. We're doing a recap of things that they went back on the word on. So now they said they weren't going to do pay-per-views. Now they're considering doing pay-per-views. And now they're saying that they're not going to focus on the American market, which was their mission statement. We're really focusing on getting American-based subscribers. Now they're not focusing on that anymore, because again, they failed in that area. So everything that they set out to do, for the most part, they failed at. Right? And everyone wants to talk about how American pay-per-views are losing money. But how much money has DAZN lost? Right? How much money has DAZN lost? If you want to think about it. Everyone cared about PBC losing money. Everyone cares about Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 2 losing money. But how much money has DAZN lost? Ask yourself that question. Is it any of my business? No. But again, I follow the sport, and I kind of like finance, so it does intrigue me knowing the numbers. I like to see. I like the business side of boxing, just as well as the analytical side of boxing. So I like the fights. I like the marquee matches, but I also like the business side. I think it's interesting because the, the major reason why these big fights aren't getting made is it comes down to dollars, right? Risk for reward, right? So it's part of the sport, whether we want to admit it or not. So ask yourself that: is the zone? Obviously, I think they probably were losing money in the United States, right? So now they're going to focus more on these European matchups now. So you're probably see. I'm curious to see if Golden Boy, DAZN re-ups with Golden Boy. Curious to see that because that's one of the reasons why they had Golden Boy because obviously because of Canelo and because of the stable. So let's see what happens there. You know, Clarissa Shields was on DAZN a few times. Now she's on Sky, right? And some of these other fighters, Hughie Fury went to Sky, right? Joshua is still affiliated with Sky, I believe. I'm not sure if his deal is up or not, right? Savannah Marshall went to Sky, right? So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens moving forward. But what we said about 2 years ago, proof's in the pudding. We were right. We were right. So once again, guys like myself and D-Style and the HCP and the guys who do the roundtable, obviously everyone has their own opinions, but for the most part, we're pretty objective, right? When we say something, people want to say, oh, it's hate, it's this, it's that, bias, and everyone's biased, but I think there is a level of objectivity to what we say. And we were being objective when we said these things because a lot of the stuff just did not sound feasible. And given what we've seen now and the reports that have come out now, they were not. All right, that's all I got for now, guys. Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Have a great day. And hopefully I can stay awake tonight because I want to go live for that Shakur Stevenson Jamal Herring fight. But thank you so much, guys. Talk to you soon. Have a great day and stay safe. Make sure you check out the Ringside Reporter podcast every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you check out the HCP Roundtable podcast every Thursday. I'm always on that, whether it's on DstyleBoxing's channel, Maestro Boxing's channel, G Funky Boxing's channel, or my channel. I will be there every Thursday, and that show will always be tweeted out and shared so you guys can make sure you tune into that. Make sure you subscribe to all of their channels as well. So shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to everybody out there watching boxing. And yeah, peace out, everybody. Stay safe. Talk to you soon. Oh, one more thing. Make sure you click the link in the description box, manscaped.com. Use the Ringside Reporter code. You get 20% off and free shipping. Great grooming products. Eric and I have those products. Body wash, sanitary products as well. Boxers, all that stuff, t-shirts. Make sure you check that out. Click that link in the description box to get some of those great products. You're going to get 20% off plus free shipping. You can't beat that deal. Products are definitely worth it. All right, guys, take it easy. Have a good one.